And next up today, we have an incredibly important guest. Senator Mohammed Aurangzeb is a senior banker and has served in regional positions including JP Morgan and ABN AMRO. Before joining as federal minister, he has served as president and CEO of HBL, as well as chairman of Pakistan Banks Association and Pakistan Business Council. May you please join me in welcoming chief guest, Senator Mohammed Aurangzeb, the federal minister for finance and revenue.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Asfa, distinguished panelists, delegates, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I've been attending these forums in a different capacity in the yesteryears, and today I represent and come here as a government representative. I was in, and I briefly attended the FII in Riyadh when I was there with the Prime Minister to meet the Crown Prince last week. Just looking at the slate of thinkers and industry practitioners in this conference, that's what I have to say, this is no less than what I saw in Riyadh. So well done to the organizers in getting stellar speakers and delegates. Also, as Excellency mentioned, you told me, especially our foreign guests, and the fact that they got their visas in hours, in terms of being online real time, I think we are beginning to move in the right direction, long way to go. Now, we have made significant progress in terms of macroeconomic stability. This is being manifested in a number of ways. Our twin deficits have turned into surpluses, whether it's on the fiscal side of things or the current account. And certainly, whatever we gained during the last fiscal year, we have consolidated those gains in the first quarter of this fiscal year in terms of current account surpluses in August and September on the back of very strong remittance flows, and that situation, as you know, continues into October as well. The stable currency, foreign exchange reserves, the downward trajectory in inflation. The governor made very explicit statements around this, around the Monetary Policy Committee when the policy rate was brought down by further 250 basis points. And to a certain extent, ye samarat hain. These are early wins, because macroeconomic stability is not a goal in itself. It's a means to an end. ये एक foundation है, एक basic hygiene है, जिसके ऊपर हमने अब वापस इमारत अपनी खड़ी करनी है. तो इसलिए जो अभी upgrades हुए हैं in the first quarter of this fiscal year in terms of credit ratings, I think we've moved in the right direction. Obviously, hopefully, we will move towards a single B during this fiscal year so that we can join back the Committee of Nations. Still way to go. Policy rate की मैंने बात की है, लेकिन जितने यहाँ industry practitioners हैं, हमेशा हम policy rate की बात करते हैं, लेकिन even before this policy rate cut, the 6-month CIBOR was hovering around 13%. This is your reference rate. This is where lending and borrowing happens. And therefore, जो signal है back into the private sector is the banking sector, and a lot of banking titans are यहाँ मौजूद हैं इस वक्त. They are making financing available to the private sector and at affordable pricing. And some of you are actually getting your lending rates and your borrowing rates and your borrowing costs now going down to single digits. तो इसलिए ये जो different chambers से गुफ्तगू होती है और different लोगों से बात होती है, आपका reference rate काइबोर है. पॉलिसी रेट को ज़रूर नीचे आना चाहिए, बिकॉज जो पॉलिसी जो रियल इंटरेस्ट रेट का डिफरेंशियल है वो अपनी जगह मौजूद है. And इस दफ़ा, the State Bank has already made that move. So this is all about giving now relief to a lot of segments which were afflicted in terms of their growth potential because of the high borrowing costs. उसी में another important point is food inflation, which is also coming down. Now, but where we see anomalies, we will come down hard. 2 days back, in the Economic Coordination Committee, हमने दो trends देखे around pulses and chicken. And this is going to be now a regular agenda item in the Economic Coordination Committee. Because if you look at these two commodities, या food items, तो internationally ये prices नीचे आई हैं, petroleum prices generally 6 महीने में नीचे आई हैं, transportation costs नीचे आए हैं. How can we have 50-60% increase in the prices of pulses and 15% increase in the price of chicken? We will simply not allow middlemen arbitrage, ताकि ये जो relief है जो common man के पास जानी है, इसको जो है हम इसको पाया तकमील तक ना पहुंचा सकें. तो इसमें this will be a standard agenda item in the ECC, and with my fellow Minister of Planning, Mr. Hassan Iqbal, who runs जो pricing committees हैं उनके साथ मिलकर will ensure कि जो inflation नीचे आई है, and alhamdulillah from 38% to now single digits. तो ये जो बात होती है कि जी इसका कॉमन मैन को क्या फ़ायदा हो रहा है, we'll ensure that this absolute gets passed on to the person on ground. During annual meetings in Washington with all the stakeholders, and these were multilateral institutions, our development partners, these were my counterparts, finance ministers from various countries, rating agencies, institutional investors. There were two consistent messages. One was their appreciation of rebuilding the trust and credibility in terms of the track record that is now coming through over the last 12 to 14 months. And even more importantly, the message was stay the course. And the same chorus and messaging is coming from all of you in the country, that there is no room for complacency. And I totally agree with both of these messaging, because ये जो messaging आ रही है, this is around our structural reforms, whether it's on the taxation side, whether it's our fixing our energy equation, whether it's the SOE reforms and the privatization agenda, and indeed the public finances. कि जो गवर्नमेंट का एक्सपेंडिचर है और फेडरल गवर्नमेंट का जो एक्सपेंडिचर है उसकी राइट साइजिंग होनी चाहिए, उसमें पेंशन रिफॉर्म्स आनी चाहिए, so that whatever taxation is coming through, this being appropriately spent. Now, this जो messaging है आपकी, that's why I say it's loud and clear for two reasons. One, our past record is not stellar. हम भटक जाते हैं. We go off track. The moment we get onto track, there are many pressures which come through and we go off track. Number one. Number two, there is no single silver bullet. ये जितनी मैंने reforms की बात की है, और मैं बार-बार ये बात कहता हूँ कि the what and why have been known to the country not for years but for decades. It's only the how part of it, and that will require a very holistic approach. कोई ये silver bullet नहीं है. उसमें starting with people and therefore governance, simplifying processes and technology. अभी Chairman Vion talked about digitalization and how this is going to help, and of course, this is going to help in terms of digital Pakistan, in terms of where we're going to go. But in all our government institutions, this is so important in terms of end-to-end digitalization and the role of technology in bringing transparency, in stemming leakages, and corruption, by reducing the human intervention, and ultimately improved client service. Now, undoubtedly, there will be bumps on the road. अगर इतना ही आसान होता तो ये कुछ सालों और डेकेड में हो गया होता, तो इसलिए ये हिकअप्स आएंगे और इसमें we have to remain steadfast, और जो आपकी तरफ से सब कुछ मैसेजेस वापस आ रहे हैं इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी से, हमारे पार्टनर से वापस आ रहे हैं, stay the course, we absolutely intend to stay the course. Now, we need to do all of this for the short to medium term ताकि इस इकोनॉमी को हम टर्न अराउंड कर सकें. And as I said, the macroeconomic stability is step one in that direction before we start talking about sustainable growth. Now, how do we get there? And that's where, we come to the topic in hand, what matters now? What matters now? And that's where there's a tactical part of it, and there is a strategic part to it. And the speakers before me have already touched on some of the strategic elements around that. As far as the tactical aspect is concerned, once we on this roadmap of structural reforms, we have to have a very clear road to market. And that road to market is कि हम number one, fundamentally DNA economy की change करें towards export orientation. Import substitution, जो हमने industry को मराद दी, उनको protection दी for the longest time without sunset clauses, that cannot continue going forward, right? Because क्योंकि इसमें दो चीज़ें हैं. On one side, the government has to come in to help vis-a-vis taxation, vis-a-vis competitive interest rates, and of course the overall ease of doing business. But at the same time, the private sector, which has to lead the country, I've been saying that over the last 6 months, and I've been saying that in my private sector role, the private sector has to lead the country. But the private sector also has to improve its productivity. It takes two. It takes two. So when we are talking about changing the DNA of the economy, we need to do what we need to do in terms of the government, जैसे अभी असफर ने कहा, policy framework, policy continuity. And then we should get the hell out of this whole thing so that the private sector can take this forward. Lekin the private sector has to also do what they need to do in terms of increasing their productivity. The second thing is FDI. And of course, FDI के दो components हैं. It was just mentioned, Excellency yourself as well, and Asfar mentioned that as well. The investment appetite, these have been very publicly stated. And so I don't want to get into those numbers. But the ball is back in our court in terms of coming up with investable, bankable projects where folks can come in, do equity investments, and get board seats. That's sustainable for our foreign investors, that's sustainable for our local investors, and that's the only sustainable way forward for this country. That's one aspect of it. And the second aspect of it is when we get into FDI, we have to focus on that FDI going forward, which produces exportable surplus. Otherwise, the currency mismatch is something which we have been facing with in the yesteryears. We are still facing that issue, and going forward, we have to stem this by really focusing on that FDI, which leads to exportable surplus. And the third thing is, of course, accessing the international capital markets so that we can get on to a sustainable growth path. Now, the second part of it, and as for you sort of touched on some of those matters which are so critical in terms of what matters now. And that, I've mentioned it previously, I'll again repeat it, are what I would call existential issues for the country. Population growth. At 2.55%, this is not a ticking bomb, this is a bomb which has exploded. And therefore, there are two issues which are related to that, directly related to the population growth. Number one, child stunting. 40% of children under 5 are suffering from child stunting. Now, in the yesteryears, we have made interventions, and these have been primarily interventions on the nutritional side. We need to take a very holistic approach in terms of health, of course, nutrition, family planning, safe water, sanitation, and the hygiene agenda. And the second thing, again associated with population, is reducing learning poverty, especially for girls, young women, who constitute majority of out-of-school children. ये दोनों चीज़ें directly linked हैं with the first issue. And then the second big issue is the climate. Increasing climate resilience against floods and water, agri-climate nexus. 2022 was a wake-up call for the country. And the second one is decarbonizing the environment, which is around air pollution. We see Lahore in the news every single day, so I don't need to speak in terms of the importance of attending to this as of yesterday. Now, ladies and gentlemen, from my perspective, we have no choice. You have no choice. We cannot move sequentially. We cannot say कि पहले इकोनॉमिक टर्न अराउंड कर लें, ये IMF का प्रोग्राम कंप्लीट कर लें, और ये आजकल सब खबरों की जीनत है कि कल टैक्स क्या है, परसों का इंटरेस्ट रेट क्या है, और ये नैरेटिव कहाँ है? Where is this narrative around the existential issues? So the economic reforms are absolutely critical. We are absolutely committed, because without this, the country cannot move forward. But having said that, ये जो existential issues हैं, by the time we get to be 100, when we are 2047, if we don't attend these now, we will have a huge issue. ये हम population growth की बात कर रहे हैं, आज 240 million है, ये 400 million हो जाएगा, whatever. On one side, okay, that's fine, that's the size of the market. But if we are having all of these issues today at 240 million, can you imagine what will happen when this country has a population of 400 million plus? So therefore, taking care of human capital development and climate resilience have to go hand in hand. Now, जैसे अभी असफर ने भी जिक्र किया, I'm sure, जो जैसे मैंने economic और structural reforms की बात की है, I'm sure we are all in wild agreement in terms of the what and why part of it. It's always the how part of it. And there we are very grateful to our development partners who will help us not only in terms of financing, but also capacity building in these areas, both in the government and more importantly in the private sector. इस context में जो अभी discussions हुई हैं in Washington and earlier when I was there for the spring meetings, I'm very grateful to President Ajay Banga on the World Bank side, because उनके साथ यही बात हुई है कि ये पहला मुल्क होगा जो country partnership framework की तरफ जा रहा है अगले 10 साल के लिए. Because these issues which I've just mentioned are not about tomorrow, not about next week, not about next month, not about the fund program, not about the next 3 years. This is at least a decade. और ये सारी चीज़ें हम incorporate कर रहे हैं in that country partnership framework. As I said, if we are not, we are certainly going to be one of the first countries to agree on this partnership framework, and it's not only with the bank, but also with ADB, and yesterday I had meetings with the AIB and other development partners. They're all there to help, support, assist us. लेकिन जिस तरह हमें FDI में investable, bankable projects लेकर आने हैं, इसी तरह अपनी तरफ हमने ये capacity build करनी है कि इन projects को हम आगे कैसे लेकर जाएं, and therefore the capacity building part of it is going to be very important. The last thing I just want to mention is that while we work with our development partners, my plea to all of the local and the foreign investors is, please come and partner with us and invest in these areas which matter and which matter now to break away from the past patterns and build the foundation to sustain future growth. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation and giving me a very patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. If you could just stay on stage, we could have some time for some Q&A from the audience. I think some people would absolutely love to ask you some questions. Could you just please pronounce your name, your company? Yep, no problem. Where you're from, and please can you keep the questions brief so we can have a few more. Thank you, Senator.
जी बताइए जी. You can take the mic over there.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dr. Kashif. I'm rector of Khadim Ali Shah Bukhari Institute of Technology. Sir, my question to you is, what is government doing in terms of research and development? I'm talking about the actual research and development. The problem is most of the thing that we are doing now these days is like we are talking about expansion in the technology sector of Pakistan. You know, we are getting $3.5 billion of export of IT products. But most of these things are actually the areas, the software development that is taking place is not based on the research and development. We are talking about the research, actual research in artificial intelligence, actual research in educational transformation, actual research in government transformation. And this is where we are lacking. Government is not supporting the research culture in the country. So in order to sustain for a longer run, you need to actually focus and have strong investments in terms of research, actual research in the country. Thank you.
Yeah. So I will just repeat what I said earlier. गवर्नमेंट को भूल जाए, गवर्नमेंट की रिसर्च पे फोकस ना करें. अगर गवर्नमेंट की रिसर्च इतनी हो रही होती तो आज हमारी जो एग्रीकल्चर प्रोडक्टिविटी और यील्ड है वो कहीं की कहीं चली गई होती. कितने इंस्टीट्यूट्स हैं इस मुल्क में. सो काइंडली टेक प्राइवेट सेक्टर, काइंडली टेक दैट लीड, राइट. ये जो अभी आपने एआई की बात की है इन एफआईआई इन रियाद, यू नो एआई वाज द मेन टॉपिक इन रियाद, एंड ऑफ कोर्स you heard the discussion from the SoftBank CEO and owner, because he talks about ASI, right, artificial super intelligence. And if you've heard his interview, I'm not going to repeat that. That's where we need to go. But it's coming from the private sector. आप भूल जाएं और मत रिलाई करें आप गवर्नमेंट और गवर्नमेंट रिसर्च पे. आप खुद इसको आगे लेकर चलिए. And we will provide you the necessary support as we go forward, inshallah. Ji, please.
Amina Sayyed, and I've been publishing school textbooks for 30 years. You just mentioned that the government should not interfere with the private sector. We have not been allowed to supply textbooks to any government school across Pakistan. They're provided by the Sindh Textbook Board. And in Punjab, for the last 2 years, every textbook developed by the private sector has to be approved by the by the Punjab Curriculum Board. And they, in the process of approval, they mutilate these textbooks. And you mentioned that education and human development is so important. How can our children be educated if they are using low quality textbooks and high quality textbooks produced by the private sector, world class textbooks, are not allowed into government schools?
Right. It's a fair question, Ji. I don't have a ready answer for that. I wasn't aware of this. As far as you know, education is now after the 18th Amendment is very much a provincial subject. Having said that, there's something which we'll take it up, we'll take it away. कि इसमें क्या issues हैं और ये क्यों नहीं accept हो रही, and what are the reasons for that. Unfortunately, I do not have a ready answer because I'm not up to speed on this particular issue, but I will take it away and pick it up with the Education Minister. Thank you.
One last question, please. One last question.
अली खिजर साहब, आपको कौन सी चीज़ है जिसका आपको नहीं पता जो आप मेरे से पूछने लगे हैं, लेकिन आप पूछ लीजिए फिर भी.
सर, आप बात कर रहे हैं कि गवर्नमेंट का रोल नहीं होना चाहिए.
जी. एक
फ्यूचर समिट है, आप प्राइवेट सेक्टर से आ रहे हैं और आप क्रेडिट ले रहे हैं पल्सेस और चिकन की प्राइसेस फिक्स करने का. थोड़ा समझा दें क्यों है सर.
नहीं, देखिए, मैं तो एक चीज़ आपके साथ पूरा एग्री करता हूँ कि जिस चीज़ में से गवर्नमेंट निकल जाए उसी में बेहतरी है. क्योंकि देखें, आप क्रॉप्स की बात करते हैं, आप एग्रीकल्चर की बात करते हैं. And let's pick up. I mean, let's be very specific about it, right? I mean, there are two crops, which is rice and maize. कभी आपने सुना है supply, demand, scandals, import क्या कौन करेगा, export क्या करेगा? राइस पिछले साल भी $4 बिलियन की तरफ एक्सपोर्ट हुई, और मेरी अभी गवर्नर साहब से बात हो रही थी लास्ट वीक, and his estimates based on whatever he's sensing, it will be at least a similar amount this year as well, right? ना किसी को पता चलता है कि आपने कब ग्रो किया, क्या एकरेज हुई और ये एक्सपोर्ट हो गई. 2 areas, wheat and sugar, and I deal with that in the ECC every single month, and respective governments have been dealing with that. तो मेरी रिक्वेस्ट मैंने की है मिनिस्टर ऑफ फूड से, बिकॉज देखिए ये everyone has to think through their own avenues, and they have to come up with the policy thing. From my side, इन चीज़ों से भी जितना गवर्नमेंट निकल जाए, पंजाब गवर्नमेंट ने डिसाइड किया कि ये वीट की सपोर्ट प्राइस ख़त्म करनी चाहिए. इट्स एब्सोल्युटली द राइट थिंग टू डू, एब्सोल्युटली द राइट थिंग टू डू. और इनको आप जो है सप्लाई डिमांड और मार्केट में जाने दें, और इंशाल्लाह ये भी क्रॉप्स ऐसे ही चलेंगी. और बाकी जो आपने जिक्र किया, देखिए एक रेगुलेटरी फंक्शन ज़रूर रहता है गवर्नमेंट में. एक जिस तरह हेल्थ में है, ड्रैप स्टिल नीड्स टू बी विद द गवर्नमेंट. देयर हैज़ टू बी अ रेगुलेटरी एलिमेंट टू इट, बट अदरवाइज हमारी इंटरवेंशन इन सप्लाई डिमांड शुड नॉट बी देयर. आई फुली एग्री विद यू. जी, लास्ट
Amir Ibrahim, last question. This was last question.
You are a wanted person. Sir, we've been doing a lot of work around transformations, working in the government. I was just wondering whether you're happy with the progress in this transformation. If not, what can be done better? And especially, what can private sector and corporate sector do to facilitate and coordinate with you to accelerating this pace?
Yeah. So, Amir, you have been very instrumental. Chairman, you don't know it, but the Prime Minister wanted him in the government as well. He somehow managed to stay away. I could not manage that. So we are very grateful for Amir and Jazz and overall young group support that we are getting. But to answer your question, listen, I think कि जहाँ private sector हमें help कर सकता है, especially the area where you are helping and supporting us, and you have been on the task force as well in terms of end-to-end digitalization of FBR. And I've already said why we want to do end-to-end digitalization of FBR. मेरी सिर्फ एक जो request है from the private sector, that while we are trying to do what we are trying to do in terms of simplifying processes, in terms of trying to reduce the human intervention, आप भी हमारी मदद करें, because ये not सालों का नहीं, ये decades की बात है. Speed money, facilitation money, right? Allow us to do what we are doing, and you kindly stay firm, even if you are advised by the people who have been dealing with the tax authority कि जी ये तो हमें करना पड़ेगा, कई वज़ीर आते हैं, कई वज़ीर चले जाते हैं, हमें तो इन्हीं के साथ डील करना है, right? Stop this. Try us out. Right, because मैंने जब पहले कहा है, it takes 2 to tango in terms of the productivity, but also from the private sector, 2 महीने, 3 महीने, साल हमें दें. Stand firm, stand firm, because when you are documenting an economy, which is, our last year, our tax revenues were 9.4 trillion, and 9 trillion rupees cash in circulation. When you start going to move this cash in towards document, of course there's going to be resistance, of course there's going to be pushback. But we are very clear that our hand has been forced, both internally and externally. जो मुझे लोग मेरे से बात करते हैं, इस दफ़ा क्यों होगा? इस दफ़ा इसलिए होगा कि अगर ये टैक्स रेवेन्यूज़ हम इस दफ़ा ना बढ़ा सके, क्या चॉइस है हमारे पास? Going back to the same for more? Salaried class and manufacturing sector, right? It's not sustainable anymore. और वो लोग कहते हैं कि जी आप कहते हैं हम empathetic हैं, इसलिए भी empathetic हूँ because before October I paid my taxes as well as a salaried class person before I went into the government. So it's not sustainable, and especially on the external side as well, where it's now all has to be investment led. Those lots are gone. Therefore, we cannot continue to kick can down the road. So once again, Asfar, thank you very much for the kind invitation. Would have loved to stay here longer, but Islamabad beckons me, so I have to go back. But a real pleasure, and I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. If you could just stay on stage with us so you can give out the wonderful souvenirs, please.